Sarah Martinez stood in her father's garage, oil stains covering her overalls, as she tightened the last bolt on the small plane engine. At 16, she could strip and rebuild any motor better than most grown men, but it wasn't car engines that made her heart race. Every time a military jet screamed overhead, she would drop her tools and run outside, watching until the silver dot disappeared into the clouds. "Girls don't fly fighter jets," her high school counselor had said when Sarah mentioned her dream. "Maybe consider nursing or teaching instead." Sarah's jaw had tightened. She'd heard those words too many times. Her own father, a Vietnam veteran, had laughed when she first mentioned wanting to be a pilot. "Flying is dangerous work, Mija. Leave that to the boys." But Sarah's grandfather understood. He'd been a mechanic in World War II, working on the planes that brave pilots took into battle. When Sarah was little, he'd tell her stories about the women who flew military aircraft during the war, ferrying planes from factories to air bases. "Those ladies had steel in their spines," he'd say, "just like you." The old man had died when Sarah was 14, but not before making her promise to chase her dreams, no matter what anyone said. Now, 2 years later, Sarah spent every free moment at the local airport. She'd started as a volunteer, cleaning planes and fetching coffee for the flight instructors, but her dedication and natural talent caught attention. Within 6 months, she'd earned her private pilot's license. By 18, she had more flight hours than many college aviation students. The day she graduated high school, Sarah walked straight to the Air Force recruiting office. The sergeant behind the desk looked surprised when this 5'4" teenager with grease still under her fingernails announced she wanted to be a fighter pilot. "You sure about this, miss? We have lots of other opportunities for women in the Air Force. Administration, communications, medical." Sarah's dark eyes flashed. "I want to fly fighters, sir. I've wanted it since I could walk." The recruiter studied her application. Perfect grades, exceptional aptitude test scores, and flight experience that impressed even him. But he'd seen determined young women before. The fighter pilot program was brutal. Most men couldn't handle it. "The training is harder than anything you can imagine," he warned. "You'll be competing against the best pilots in the country. And honestly, some of your instructors and fellow cadets won't be happy to see a woman in their ranks." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm not going there to make friends, sir. I'm going there to earn my wings." 3 months later, she arrived at undergraduate pilot training in Texas. The base was a sea of confident young men, all convinced they were destined to be the next generation of fighter aces. When Sarah stepped off the bus with her regulation duffel bag, conversations stopped. Heads turned. Someone whistled mockingly. "Looks like we got ourselves a diversity hire," one cadet muttered to his friend. Sarah kept walking, her chin up. She'd expected this. What she hadn't expected was how alone she'd feel that first night in the barracks. She was the only woman in a class of 30. The silence in the hallway felt heavy as she unpacked her gear. Her first flight instructor was Captain Rick Morrison, a former F-15 pilot with 15 years of experience and a reputation for being tough on students. He took one look at Sarah and sighed. "Let me guess," he said. "You're here to prove a point about women in combat." "No, sir," Sarah replied. "I'm here because I'm good at flying, and I want to serve my country." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "We'll see about that. In my aircraft, there's only one thing that matters. Can you fly? Everything else is just noise." That first training flight nearly broke her confidence. Morrison pushed her harder than she'd ever been pushed, testing every skill she thought she'd mastered. Her hands shook as they went through emergency procedures at high speed. Sweat soaked her flight suit despite the air conditioning. When they landed, Morrison was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. "You made 17 mistakes up there," he said. Sarah's heart sank. "But you corrected 16 of them before I had to say anything. That's better than most of my students do on their 10th flight." He paused, then looked her directly in the eyes. "Martinez, if you can handle the pressure they're going to put on you here, you might actually make it. But it's going to get a lot harder before it gets easier." Sarah nodded, understanding that this was both a warning and an opportunity. She was going to prove that she belonged in that cockpit, no matter what it took. The harassment started on Sarah's second week of training. Someone put baby powder in her flight helmet. Another time, she found her flight suit tied in knots. Small things, designed to rattle her concentration and waste her time. Just boys being boys, the squadron commander said when she reported it. Maybe if you can't handle a little joke, fighter pilot training isn't for you. Sarah learned to arrive at the flight line 30 minutes early to check her equipment. She studied twice as long as everyone else, knowing she couldn't afford to make mistakes. While her classmates went out for beers, she stayed in her room reviewing flight manuals and emergency procedures. The academic portion of training was where Sarah first started to stand out. Her mechanical background helped her understand aircraft systems better than most. She aced every test, often scoring higher than anyone else in the class. But it was in the air where she truly began to shine. Martinez has natural stick and rudder skills, Captain Morrison told the other instructors. She feels the airplane. You can't teach that. By her 6th month of training, Sarah was consistently ranking in the top 3 of her class. Her flying was precise, smooth, and confident. But her success only seemed to make the hostility worse. She's getting special treatment, some cadets whispered. They're going easy on her because she's a woman. The whispers reached Colonel James Patterson, the wing commander. Patterson was old-school military, a veteran of 3 combat tours, who believed in tradition and order. He'd watched the integration of women into military roles with skepticism. Lieutenant Martinez, he called her into his office one afternoon. I've been watching your progress. Sarah stood at attention, uncertain what was coming. Patterson walked around his desk and studied her with the calculating look of a man sizing up an opponent. Some people think you're here because of politics, he said bluntly. That the Air Force needs to show it's giving women opportunities, whether they can handle it or not. Sarah's hands clenched into fists behind her back, but she kept her voice steady. Sir, my scores speak for themselves. They do, Patterson agreed. But scores in training don't mean much when someone's shooting at you. The question is, when the pressure is real, when lives are on the line, can you handle it? He walked to his window overlooking the flight line. I'm putting you through advanced combat training early. Normally, students don't see air-to-air combat scenarios until month 8. You're going to face them next week. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Advanced combat training was where many promising cadets washed out. It was designed to simulate real combat conditions, with experienced pilots playing enemy aircraft. Sir, may I ask why? Patterson turned back to her. Because I want to know what you're really made of. If you can't handle it, better to find out now than when your wingman's life depends on you. The following Monday, Sarah found herself strapped into an F-16 trainer, facing off against Major Tom Viper Johnson, one of the base's most skilled aggressor pilots. Johnson had shot down over 30 student pilots in simulated combat. He took particular pleasure in humbling overconfident cadets. Little lady. Johnson's voice crackled through the radio as they began the exercise. Hope you're ready for a lesson in how real pilots fight. The engagement began at 20,000 feet. Johnson came at Sarah hard and fast, using every trick he'd learned in 20 years of flying. But something remarkable happened. Sarah didn't just survive his attacks. She adapted to them. When Johnson tried to force her into a turning fight, Sarah used her aircraft's energy advantage to climb away. When he attempted to ambush her from above, she saw him coming and defeated his attack with a perfectly timed defensive maneuver. After 15 minutes of intense aerial combat, Sarah managed something no student had done in over a year. She maneuvered behind Johnson and achieved a simulated missile lock. Fox 2, she called calmly into her radio, indicating a successful shot. The radio was silent for a moment. Then Johnson's voice came back, and there was a note of respect in it that hadn't been there before. Good kill, Martinez. That was textbook flying. When they landed, Johnson pulled off his helmet and looked at Sarah with new eyes. Word of her victory spread through the squadron within hours. For the first time since arriving at training, some of her classmates looked at her with something other than skepticism. Captain Morrison found her that evening in the squadron ready room, still reviewing the mission video. "You know what you did today?" he asked. Sarah looked up from the screen. "I got lucky." "Sir?" Morrison shook his head. "You proved you belong here. Johnson's been flying combat missions since before you were born. And you outflew him. That wasn't luck. That was skill." He sat down beside her. "But I want you to understand something. This is just the beginning. The better you get, the harder they're going to try to tear you down. Some people will never accept that a woman can do this job." Sarah nodded, thinking of the long road still ahead. "Sir, what if I'm not strong enough to handle it all?" Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Strength isn't about being tougher than everyone else, Martinez. It's about being tougher than you were yesterday. And from what I've seen, you get a little stronger every time someone tells you that you can't do something." That night, Sarah called her father for the first time since starting training. When she told him about her victory in aerial combat, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mija," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "your grandfather would be so proud." For the first time in months, Sarah smiled genuinely. She was beginning to understand that earning her place wasn't just about proving herself to others. It was about discovering just how far she was willing to go to achieve her dreams. 2 years after beginning training, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood on the tarmac at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, looking at her assigned F-16. The desert heat shimmered off the concrete as ground crew performed final checks on her aircraft. After months of advanced training and combat preparation, she was finally here. This was real. "Welcome to the sandbox, Martinez," said Major Kate Stevens, the only other female pilot in the squadron. Stevens had been flying combat missions for 3 years and had become something of a legend among female aviators. "First, deployment is always interesting." Sarah adjusted her survival vest and checked her equipment one more time. "Any advice?" "Ma'am?" Stevens smiled grimly. "Trust your training, trust your wingman, and don't try to be a hero on your first mission. The enemy doesn't care what's between your legs. They just want to kill you." Sarah's first combat mission was a routine patrol along the Pakistani border. Flying as wingman to Captain Mike "Shooter" Reynolds, she spent 2 hours scanning the mountainous terrain below for signs of enemy activity. Nothing happened, but the weight of carrying live weapons over hostile territory was something no amount of training could fully prepare her for. "How'd it feel?" Reynolds asked after they landed. "Different," Sarah admitted. "More real." Reynolds nodded. "It always is. But you flew good formation and kept your eyes open. That's what matters." Over the following weeks, Sarah flew dozens of missions: close air support for ground troops, reconnaissance flights, escort duty for transport aircraft. Each mission taught her something new about combat flying. The enemy was clever, using the mountainous terrain to hide from aircraft and setting ambushes for coalition forces. Her first real test came on a hot September morning. Sarah was flying patrol with Reynolds when their radio crackled with an urgent call. "Viper flight, this is Groundhog 6. We are taking heavy fire and have casualties. Request immediate air support." Reynolds banked toward the coordinates while Sarah followed, her heart rate spiking. Below them, she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions in the rocks above a small village where American soldiers were pinned down. "Groundhog 6, this is Viper 1. I can see your position. We'll take out those gun positions for you." Sarah watched Reynolds line up his attack run, diving toward the enemy positions with precision. His bombs hit exactly on target, silencing 2 machine gun nests. But as he pulled up, Sarah spotted something that made her blood run cold. "Viper 1, break left. Surface-to-air missile, 2 o'clock." The enemy had hidden a shoulder-fired missile launcher in the rocks. The missile streaked toward Reynolds' aircraft. But Sarah's warning gave him just enough time to deploy flares and break away. The missile missed by 50 feet. "Good eyes, Viper 2, Reynolds called. "Your turn. There's still 1 gun position active." Sarah rolled into her attack dive, focusing on the target while scanning for threats. The ground rushed up at her as she lined up her shot. At the last second, she spotted movement in the rocks. Another missile launcher. Instead of breaking off her attack, Sarah made a split-second decision. She released her bombs on the gun position, while simultaneously launching flares and pulling into a violent turn. The enemy missile passed harmlessly behind her as her bombs destroyed the final threat to the ground troops. "Outstanding flying, Viper 2, came the voice from the ground controller. "Threat neutralized. Thanks for the save." That evening in the squadron briefing room, word of Sarah's performance spread quickly. She had not only completed her mission but had probably saved her wingman's life with her quick warning. "Martinez showed real combat instincts today," Reynolds told the squadron commander. She kept her head under pressure and made the right calls. But not everyone was impressed. Captain Tony Blade Morrison, no relation to her old instructor, had been vocal about his doubts regarding women in combat. "One good mission doesn't make you a combat pilot," he said within Sarah's hearing. "Let's see how she handles it when things really get tough." Sarah said nothing, but she filed the comment away. She understood that every mission would be a test, that she would have to prove herself over and over again. Her reputation continued to grow over the following months. Sarah flew with different wingmen. Learning from each pilot's experience and techniques, she showed exceptional situational awareness and an ability to remain calm under pressure that impressed even her critics. The squadron's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, began giving Sarah increasingly complex missions. "Martinez has a gift for seeing the big picture," Hayes told the wing commander. "She understands how all the pieces fit together." Sarah's tactical skills were put to the test during a particularly challenging mission in November. A high-value terrorist leader was meeting with local commanders in a remote compound. Sarah was assigned to fly reconnaissance, while a special operations team prepared to raid the location. For 3 hours, she circled the area at high altitude, using her aircraft's sensors to monitor enemy movements and provide real-time intelligence to the ground team. When the raid began, Sarah coordinated with multiple aircraft to ensure the special operations team had continuous air cover. "Your tactical coordination was flawless," the special operations commander told her after the successful mission. "That kind of thinking could take you far in this business." By her 6th month of deployment, Sarah had flown over 100 combat missions. She had proven herself capable of handling anything the enemy could throw at her. But her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel David Hawk Thompson, knew that bigger challenges were coming. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were planning a major offensive. New weapons were flowing into the area, including advanced surface-to-air missiles and fighters from neighboring countries. The relatively safe environment Sarah had operated in was about to become much more dangerous. "Martinez," Thompson called her into his office one evening. "You've done excellent work so far. But I want you to understand that the situation here is about to change. The enemy is getting stronger, more organized." Sarah nodded. "I understand, sir." Thompson studied her carefully. "Some of the older pilots think you should be rotated back to training duties. They worry that when the real shooting starts, you might not be ready for it." Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. But she kept her voice level. "Sir, I believe I've proven I can handle combat operations." "You have," Thompson agreed. "But what's coming won't be like what you've faced so far. This will be air-to-air combat against experienced enemy pilots. Are you ready for that?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." Thompson smiled slightly. "Good. Because tomorrow, you're going to get your chance to prove it." The morning briefing was tense. Intelligence reports showed a large formation of enemy aircraft moving toward coalition positions. 12 hostile fighters had been detected, along with ground attack aircraft preparing to strike American bases. "This is the big one, people," Lieutenant Colonel Thompson announced to the assembled pilots. "Enemy forces are launching a coordinated air assault. Our job is to stop them before they reach their targets." Sarah checked her equipment methodically as she listened to the mission details. She would be flying as part of a 4-ship formation, tasked with intercepting the enemy fighters at maximum range. It was exactly the kind of air-to-air combat mission she had trained for, but never faced in real combat. Martinez, Captain Morrison, approached her at her aircraft. Despite his earlier skepticism, he had come to respect her abilities. "You feeling ready for this?" Sarah pulled on her helmet and looked him in the eye. "Yes, sir. This is what I've been preparing for." Within minutes, 4 F-16 seconds roared into the dawn sky. Sarah flew as number 3 in the formation, behind Flight Leader Major Stevens and Captain Reynolds. The fourth pilot was Lieutenant Jake Torch Wilson, a young pilot on his second deployment. Contact, 12 o'clock, 40 miles, came the call from Stevens. Multiple targets. Looks like they brought everyone to the party. Sarah's radar screen lit up with enemy aircraft. 12 fighters in 3 separate groups, exactly as intelligence had predicted. Her mouth went dry, but her hands remained steady on the controls. Viper flight. This is AWACS. You are cleared to engage. Good hunting. The first engagement happened at 30 miles. Stevens launched the opening shots, firing 2 missiles at the lead enemy formation. Sarah watched the missiles streak through the sky, striking 2 enemy aircraft and removing them from the fight. 2 down, Stevens called. Let's press the attack. But the enemy pilots were more skilled than anyone had expected. Instead of breaking away, they split into multiple groups and tried to surround the American formation. Sarah found herself separated from her wingman as enemy fighters maneuvered to attack from multiple directions. Viper 3, break right. Bandit on your 6. Wilson's voice crackled through the radio. Sarah pulled her F-16 into a punishing turn, feeling the G-forces press her into her seat. An enemy missile streaked past her canopy. Missing by mere feet, she reversed her turn and found herself behind the fighter that had just tried to kill her. Fox 2, she called, launching her own missile. The enemy aircraft exploded in a ball of flame and debris. Sarah's first air-to-air kill, but there was no time to celebrate. 2 more enemy fighters were diving on her from above. Sarah used every evasive maneuver she knew, pulling her aircraft through turns that pushed both plane and pilot to their limits. When the enemy fighters tried to follow her, they couldn't match her aggressive maneuvering. Sarah reversed and found herself in perfect position. 2 quick missile shots destroyed both attacking aircraft. Viper 3 has 3 kills, Reynolds called out, amazement clear in his voice. The battle was far from over. More enemy aircraft were approaching, and Sarah could see that Wilson was in trouble. 2 enemy fighters had cornered the young pilot and were closing for the kill. Sarah didn't hesitate. She dove toward Wilson's position, pushing her F-16 to maximum speed. As the enemy fighters lined up their shots, Sarah arrived like an avenging angel. "Get off him!" she shouted into her radio, even though the enemy couldn't hear her. Her next 2 missiles found their targets, destroying both aircraft before they could fire on Wilson. "Thanks, Viper 3, Wilson called, his voice shaking. "You saved my life." Sarah was lining up on another enemy fighter when her aircraft shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across her instrument panel. She looked to her left and saw a massive hole in her wing where an enemy cannon shell had struck. "Viper 3 is hit," she called. "I've lost hydraulic pressure and my wing is damaged." "Can you make it home?" Stevens asked. Sarah tested her controls. The aircraft was sluggish and wanted to roll to the left, but it was still flying. "I think so. But I'm not done yet." Through her damaged canopy, she could see 3 more enemy fighters approaching. They seemed to sense that she was wounded and were moving in for an easy kill. They had badly underestimated their opponent. Despite her aircraft's damage, Sarah's mind was crystal clear. She had trained for scenarios exactly like this. When the first enemy fighter opened fire, she used her damaged wing to her advantage, letting the aircraft's natural roll help her avoid the gunfire while positioning herself for a shot. Her missile struck the enemy fighter dead center. The remaining 2 fighters tried to bracket her, attacking from opposite sides simultaneously. It should have been an impossible situation. No pilot should have been able to defeat 2 attackers while flying a damaged aircraft. But Sarah had spent years preparing for the impossible. She pulled her F-16 into a climb that stressed her damaged wing to its limits. As the 2 enemy fighters tried to follow, she rolled inverted and dove between them, forcing them to turn and lose position. When they tried to reacquire her, Sarah was ready. 2 missiles, 2 kills. "Viper 3 has 7 kills, Reynolds called. "Sarah, you just made history." But the celebration was premature. As Sarah turned toward home, her damaged wing finally gave way. Metal tore and hydraulic fluid sprayed across her canopy. The F-16 began to roll uncontrollably. "Mayday, mayday," Sarah called, fighting to regain control. "Viper 3 is going down." For a terrifying moment, it looked like she would have to eject over enemy territory. But Sarah refused to give up. Using every bit of skill and determination she possessed, she managed to stop the roll and regain partial control. "Negative on the ejection," she called. "I'm bringing this bird home." The flight back to base was a test of endurance and will. Sarah's damaged aircraft bucked and rolled, requiring constant attention to keep it in the air. Fuel leaked from damaged lines, and several critical systems were failing. But she made it. When the tower saw her approaching with her wing torn nearly in half, emergency crews rushed to the runway. Sarah brought the F-16 down in a landing that was more controlled crash than normal touchdown. But she walked away from it. As she climbed out of the cockpit, the entire squadron was waiting. 7 enemy aircraft destroyed in a single mission, and she had brought her damaged fighter home against impossible odds. "Martinez," Stevens said, her voice filled with admiration. "That was the finest display of flying I've ever seen." Sarah pulled off her helmet and looked at the wreckage of her wing. She was alive, her squadron was safe, and they had won the day. "Just doing my job, ma'am," she said quietly. She said quietly, but everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The pilot who had been told she didn't belong in a fighter cockpit had just proven herself beyond any possible doubt. News of Sarah's extraordinary combat performance spread through military channels like wildfire. 7 enemy aircraft destroyed in a single engagement while flying a damaged fighter home was unprecedented. The Pentagon called it one of the most remarkable displays of aerial combat skill in modern warfare. 3 days after the battle, Sarah found herself standing in Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's office, still wearing a bandage over a cut she'd received when debris hit her cockpit. "Martinez, I've got the Air Force Chief of Staff on the phone asking about you," Thompson said, shaking his head in amazement. "They want to fly you back to Washington for a medal ceremony." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I was just doing what any pilot would do." "No," Thompson said firmly. "What you did was extraordinary. You saved lives, completed the mission, and showed the world what American pilots are capable of." He paused. "You also proved a lot of people wrong." The flight home to the United States felt surreal. Sarah had deployed as a relatively unknown pilot trying to prove herself. She was returning as a combat ace and a symbol of courage under fire. The media attention was overwhelming. At Andrews Air Force Base, reporters crowded around as Sarah stepped off the transport aircraft. Camera flashes popped as journalists shouted questions. "Lieutenant Martinez, how does it feel to be the first female pilot to score 7 kills in a single mission? What would you say to people who claimed women couldn't handle air-to-air combat?" Sarah looked out at the sea of faces and microphones. A year ago, these same reporters might have questioned whether she belonged in a fighter cockpit. Now they were calling her a hero. "I'd say that courage and skill don't depend on gender," she answered simply. "They depend on training, determination, and the willingness to do your job when it matters most." The medal ceremony at the Pentagon was attended by the Secretary of Defense, the Air Force Chief of Staff, and dozens of senior military leaders. As Sarah stood at attention while the Distinguished Flying Cross was pinned to her uniform, she thought about everyone who had helped her reach this moment. Captain Morrison, her first instructor, who had pushed her to excel. Major Stevens, who had shown her what it meant to be a professional military pilot. Even Captain Blade Morrison, whose skepticism had motivated her to work harder. "Lieutenant Martinez," the Secretary of Defense said during his remarks, "your actions represent the very best of American military service. You have honored your uniform, your service, and your country." After the ceremony, Sarah was surprised to see a familiar face waiting in the hallway. Colonel Patterson, her old wing commander from training, approached with a smile. "Remember when I told you I wanted to know what you were made of?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir." "Well, now I know," Patterson said, extending his hand. "You're made of the right stuff, Martinez. I was wrong to doubt you." The conversation that meant the most to Sarah, though, happened that evening. She called her father from her hotel room, and for the first time in their relationship, She could hear pure pride in his voice. "Mija, I saw you on the news," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you. You were born to fly." "It's okay, Papa," Sarah replied. "You taught me to work hard and never give up." That's what mattered, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after returning home, Sarah received a letter from a young girl in Texas. "Dear Lieutenant Martinez," the letter read, "My name is Jessica, and I'm 10 years old. I want to be a pilot like you when I grow up. My teacher said girls can't be fighter pilots. But I told her about you. Can you tell me what I need to study to be like you?" Sarah spent an hour crafting her response, remembering how important encouragement had been during her own journey. "Dear Jessica," she wrote, "study math and science. Learn everything you can about airplanes, and never let anyone tell you what you can't do. If you work hard and believe in yourself, you can achieve anything. I look forward to flying alongside you someday." Sarah's promotion to captain came with orders to the Air Force Test Pilot School. Her combat experience and demonstrated skills made her an ideal candidate for testing new aircraft and weapon systems. It was a dream assignment for any pilot. On her last day at her home base, the squadron held a farewell ceremony. Young pilots from all over the country were requesting assignments to serve with the pilot, who had redefined what was possible. "Martinez changed everything," one young female pilot told a reporter. "She showed us that the sky really is the limit." Major Stevens, now a squadron commander herself, spoke at the ceremony. Sarah Martinez didn't just win a battle. She changed the way we think about what makes a great combat pilot. She proved that excellence comes from heart, skill, and determination, not from fitting into someone else's expectations. 5 years later, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez stood before a new class of pilot trainees at the same base where she had once struggled to prove herself worthy. Half of the students were women, something that would have been unthinkable when she started flying. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, looking out at the eager young faces, "you're here because you have the potential to be exceptional pilots. Some of you may face people who doubt your abilities. Use that doubt as fuel to make yourselves better." She paused, thinking back to that teenage girl in her father's garage who had dared to dream of flying fighter jets. The sky doesn't care about your background, your gender, or what anyone thinks you can or can't do. The sky only cares about one thing. Can you fly? If you can answer yes to that question and back it up with your actions, then nothing else matters. After the lecture, a young female cadet approached Sarah with nervous excitement. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. Because of what you did, my parents support my dream of being a fighter pilot. My little sister says she wants to be just like you." End quote. Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from that doubtful teenager to the confident pilot she had become. "Don't try to be like me," she told the cadet. "Be better than me. That's what the next generation is supposed to do." As Sarah walked across the flight line that evening, watching young pilots practice their skills in the same aircraft where she had learned to fly, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The girl who had been told she didn't belong in a fighter cockpit had not only earned her place there, but had opened the door for countless others to follow. The sky was no longer the limit. It was just the beginning.